Hi everyone, this is your teacher Tim, and for this lesson I'd like to go over something that a lot of students are worried about oftentimes, and usually that worry is unfounded, and that comes from the use of this device here, the scientific calculator, which you will receive when you take the task test for the science and mathematics portion of the test. Now just a quick reminder, TASK stands for Test of Assessing Secondary Completion, and this is the test that you will take to see whether or not you obtain your high school equivalency diploma. New York State, again, no longer uses a GED. They did away with that about 6-7 years ago, and they now use, again, what is called the TASK test. This calculator is the TI-30XS Multiview from Texas Instruments. Those of you with children in school, particularly those in middle and junior high, may have seen this calculator before. A lot of schools use this for their math classes. When they get to higher grades, sometimes they will use the graphing calculators, which is basically a larger, more complicated and more expensive version of this calculator here. As you can see, this is actually quite compact for the most part. Holds right in your hand pretty easily. And if you were looking to purchase this, you can usually find it online on Amazon or at the stores at like Staples between $15 to $20. So it's pretty reasonably priced. A lot of times too, if you're looking on Amazon, you can get it even cheaper if you use look for a used version. A lot of times you get as low as $9 or $10. So overall, a relatively inexpensive purchase if you decide to get one for yourself to practice with. Unfortunately, unless you plan on continuing on with math in some capacity, this probably won't really be very useful to you overall, especially now with most phones having calculators in them. However, if you're really concerned about this portion of the test and using this, this might be worth buying and practicing with as we go along. Now, on the test, everyone receives this for the entire science portion. That really tends to worry people a lot. That being said, it's more than likely you will not use this very much on the science part. The science part does have a little bit of math involved, but it's very little. And a lot of times that math can be done without the use of this calculator. For most of you, you will receive this calculator for half of the math portion, not the whole thing. Those with testing accommodations that have certain things approved by New York State, you may get this calculator throughout the whole test, but a majority of you will receive this for half of the math and all of the science. The test itself, though, is not made where if you can't use this guy, you're going to fail. The test is made where if you know how to use this, it'll make your life a little bit easier. I have had students come back to me and say, Tim, didn't use the calculator once for the test, didn't need it. And they passed. I've also had students go hard in the other direction, say, I forgot to use it, or I wasn't sure how to use it, and I think that's why I didn't pass. It's really hard to tell, given how they grade the test and how little information they give us in terms of what you got incorrect and got correct. So really, a lot of times it's a case-by-case basis. But again, it's good to know how to use this. It can help you very much in the long run and can make things, if not easier, quicker than doing stuff on paper. So I'm going to go over a few of the buttons here. Now, there are quite a few buttons here. As you can see, it's a very complicated looking calculator, and that's the reason why a lot of people get scared. Luckily for us, however, you will probably only need to use about a third of these buttons. And even more so, you can probably get away with using even less than that. I'm going to cover the ones that will be useful for you on the test. Starting with your basic functions here. You have your 0 through 9, your basic buttons. On this side, you have your basic 4 operations, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. We also have, which would be helpful, the on button, which will allow me to turn it on. And as you can see, once you turn it on, this little blinking black section here comes up, and that tells you that we're ready to go. So again, with these buttons, you just press them. You know, if you want to go 9 plus 9, I press 9, the plus and the 9, and this pops up. Now, in order to get an answer to a problem, you need to use the enter button, which is this guy down here in the bottom corner. When you press this, it will give you the answer to your problem. So as you can see, I have 9 plus 9. Hopefully most of you know that's 18. But when I press enter, it gives me the answer right there. The clear button is the button you're going to want to use to get rid of everything on the page itself. So if I just press clear, the whole thing's gone. That's a little bit different than the delete button. The delete button is more like a backspace. So when I press delete, I am able to get rid of the previous number, as opposed to clear, which just gets rid of everything. You also have this keypad here. Hopefully you can see those arrows, and that allows you to move throughout numbers and fractions that you make on the calculator. So you know, and I'm going to again put that 555 up there. The red cursor, or the black cursor is over here, waiting for me to press another button. But let's say I didn't want one of those 5s. I had too many. What I can do is I can use this button to move throughout the number. So I'm going to push back a few times, and you can see it's moving me within my set of 5s here. And that will allow me to delete specific numbers. Let's say, for example, I want to delete the third 5 from the left. I can do that. I can move over right there, and you can see the flashing black cursor is above that 5. And then I can press the delete button, and it will only delete that particular 5. So that can become pretty handy, especially if you're drawing out something really big and you make a small mistake and you don't want to type the whole thing over again. Oftentimes you can just go through and fix it. So just a quick example of that. If I have, let's say, 9 plus 9, but I don't want to add that anymore, I want to subtract it, I can just simply use this to go back and change that to whatever I need to change it to. In this case, I'll change it to a minus. And it did that for me. Now be careful if you plan on continuing adding things, because you'll note that the black cursor did not go to the end of the problem. Instead, it went over the next number, which in this case is the 9. So if I were to continue to type things here, it's going to replace that number. Kind of like the same way if you were to highlight something on Word or Google Docs and you to start typing, it would delete that and replace with what you're typing. Same kind of concept. So if you're going back and you don't want to change that, you need to make sure that you're pressing the over button first. You're going over one more. And so that way you can continue on with your problem. Otherwise, like I said, it will change whatever is over the top under that cursor. The other thing you want to worry about deals again back with some of these basic buttons. So we have our parentheses up here, which I'll get to. But this guy here is how you would make a number negative. So you would push the minus button, right? You put the negative button there. That pops up. And then you put whatever number you want, and that pops up. So that now made that number negative. So instead of having a positive 3, I now have a negative 3. Now you want to be careful with this. A lot of times with positive and negative numbers, I tell students in terms of their usage, subtracting something and having a negative works the same way. And that is true. However, this calculator is a little nitpicky. So what I mean by that is I wouldn't be able to do this, for example. So you notice I did 3, 2 minuses, and the 3. Now, for those of you who are familiar with negative numbers, when you have those two minuses next to each other, in terms of the integer rules, what that would do is that would be supposed to add them. So this essentially would turn into 3 plus 3. However, because I use the two minuses, the calculator is not going to like it. So watch what I do here. I'm going to press enter, and that pops up, syntax error. What that means is that you typed something incorrectly and the calculator was unable to find the answer because of that. So it's not saying you're necessarily wrong in your thinking, it's saying that you're wrong in how you typed it in. So it may just be a case of you going back and just fixing something. In this particular case, it did not like the 3 and the 2 minuses and the 3, because in the calculator's eyes, subtracting something and making something negative is different. And I guess technically it is, but how it's used in actual math is not. So I'll show you what I mean by that right here. I'm going to clear that out. So I'm going to type in 3, a minus, and then a negative 3. Now you'll note the negative is slightly higher up than the subtraction. It's also slightly smaller. So that's how you can kind of tell the differences between the two. And now that I plugged it in correctly according to the calculator, when I press enter, I get my answer of 6, which is the answer to 3 plus 3. For those of you who are unsure what's going on with the integer section, I either will have one up or have one up already, dealing with signed numbers, so feel free to take a look at that to get a little more information. But in the meantime, I'm going to go back to this calculator here. So I'm going to clear that out again. And in all reality, if you really had to, you could really get away with just those buttons there, the 0 through 9, the decimal, the negative, the 4 basic operations in the parentheses. If you really had to, you really only need to have those. However, there are a few other buttons on here that will make your life a little bit easier. So for example, here, oops, sorry, the camera there. These two guys here, you see the X2 here, and the little arrow, caret, whatever you want to call it above it. These two deal with exponents. So I'm not going to get too crazy with exponents right now, but basically what an exponent is it's telling you how many times you need to multiply a number by itself. So for example here, this is to the second power or squared. So when I press the 5 and I press this, you'll notice this little 2 popped up there. Now you notice that 2 is a little bit higher up. It's also a little bit smaller than the 5. So this is how I would type in 5 squared. Now when I press enter, it gives me an answer of, gotta get the enter button there, 25. Because 5 squared means that you're multiplying 5 times itself twice. 5 times 5 gives me 25. So this would be the same as if I were to just do this here. You'll notice I got the same answer. Again, going back to my previous comment about being able to solve things using different methods. Now, the button above it, the little caret arrow, whatever you want to call it I mentioned before, can be used to pick other numbers other than 2. So this X2 button will only square something. It will only do it to the second power. If you press this button here, it will allow you to do it to other numbers. So I'm going to put that 5 in again. I'm going to press this guy here. And you'll note, while there's still a blinking black cursor, it's a little bit smaller. It's closer to the shape of a square and a little bit higher up. And from this point, I can type in whatever numbers I need to plug in for the 5, to 5 whatever power. So in this case, I'm just going to use 3 to keep it simple. Now, the other thing you want to be careful of is you notice when I typed in that 3, the cursor did not go down. It actually stayed up right next to the 3. So if I need to add more things to it, I need to press the over button first before I continue. Otherwise, it's going to keep adding things to the top. So for example, let's say I wanted to add 3 to this problem. If I just type in plus 3, you'll notice it added it to the actual exponents, which in this particular case I don't want. So what I need to make sure I'm doing is, anytime I'm dealing with exponents in that little caret button here, this guy, I need to make sure I'm pressing the over button before I add anything up. And if you look closely, that little blinking cursor is actually an arrow, and it's almost telling you, hey, you gotta move over before you do anything else. So what I'll do is I will just simply press the over button. Now the cursor is a little bit bigger, it's where it normally was, and I can press my numbers and add stuff as needed. So you can see it's a little bit different than before. It's bigger and it's farther down. Now again, this is just simply going to multiply 5 times itself 3 times. That's going to give you 5 times 5 times 5, which is going to give us 125. Okay, and again, that's the same as doing this. One more. Don't want to divide, I want to multiply. There we go. And there we go. So again, 5 to the third power, 5 times 5 times 5, same thing. You can use either one and get the same answer. This guy here you may use, and if you do, it would only be in the context of dealing with a circle or something with a circle in it, like a cylinder or a cone or a sphere. This is the pi symbol. Those of you may be more familiar with the term 3.14. That is actually a simplified version of pi. Pi is what's called an irrational number. It goes on forever and does not repeat and does not stop. It also can't be turned into a fraction. And I'm going to get more into that in a second when we get to more buttons, but just remember that pi here you may use when it comes to volume formulas or circles. A more important button, I would say, is this guy here, the fraction button. And again, if you're unfamiliar with fractions, I would recommend checking out the introduction of fraction slideshow, as well as the adding and subtracting and multiplying and dividing as well. They would probably help a little bit if you're unfamiliar with fractions. You see the little n, the little dash, and the d. So n stands for numerator and d stands for denominator. So when I press this, you'll notice that this guy pops up, and it's asking me again to put numbers in. It's got 2 blank spots with a line between, set up almost like a fraction. So I can put whatever I want in there. So let's say I want to put in 1/2. I'll push the 1. Now again, you'll notice that cursor stayed up top. So if I want to go down underneath the fraction bar, again I need to press my down button. And I can add the 2. And again, you'll note, similar as to with the exponents, little arrow at the bottom there, that's essentially telling me if I want to continue with adding or whatever, I need to put the button in the calculator. So I got to push this guy. So this calculator will do a lot of the work for you. So if I were to say put in plus and then 1/6, normally we'd have to find a common denominator for this and then solve it that way. However, this calculator can skip through all of that. This calculator will go right to the answer that it can get for you. So if I were to press enter, you notice it comes out with 2/3. So that means that 1/2 and 1/6 is equal to 2/3. In that same vein, this calculator will want to reduce things for you if it can. So if I put in, for example, 2/4, most of you, or hopefully all of you, know that 2/4 is equivalent to 1/2. So when I press the enter button, it reduced it for me. It turned that 2/4 into the 1/2. Now again, if it doesn't do this, that means your fraction can't be reduced. So for example, if I just put in 1/3 here, I'm just taking a random simplified form, press enter, it doesn't change. So if it doesn't change when you press enter after typing it in, that means it can't change. Again, this calculator wants to do as much work for you as it can. So a lot of times it can be helpful if you get odd-looking fractions. For example, this one here. I use this very commonly with my example. Most people would probably be fairly unaware that could be reduced 21/111. They're both odd numbers. They're both a little unusual. They're both ending in 1. However, this can be reduced, and this is a case where the calculator might help you. It can be a little more precise, and it can be a little more definite. Not everyone knows when to reduce. Not everyone knows what to reduce by. So if you plug something in and press the enter button, again, it does the reduction for you. So it saved my answer here. You'll also note that these two fractions again are equivalent. So what that means is they have the same decimal value. I went over this briefly with the fraction lesson. However, you can get a better idea of what I do here. So when I divide 21 divided by 111, I get that decimal there. So this is what's known as a repeating decimal. It may look a little funky, but you notice there's a pattern here. 0.189, 189, 189, 189. So this is not an irrational number. It's a repeating decimal because it continues on and because there's a set pattern. Now, watch what happens when I do 7 divided by 37, which is, according to the calculator, my reduced form. I got the same answer. So that's another way you can tell that fractions are equivalent by whether or not they give you the same decimal answer. But I digress. I got a little off topic there. We're talking about calculator here. Anywho, we went over your numbers, your basic operations, the toggle or the keypad here, delete, clear. That's pretty much all the major buttons you're going to need to use in terms of the actual white buttons here. Now you may have noticed there's a few green buttons here as well, a few green symbols. Well, you can access those by pressing second first. So you'll see second is in green, so within green and green. The second button is very similar to maybe like a shift. When you press it, you'll notice that the little second pops up right there. You can't really see it, okay? And so what that means from here on out, whenever you press a button, you will not be accessing the white symbol. You'll be accessing the green symbol. So for example, if I press second and fraction, I'm not going to get your run-of-the-mill fraction. What I'm going to get is I'm going to get a mixed number. And as you can see down there, that is set up almost like a mixed number. So same deal as before, when I'm typing things in, I need to make sure that I am moving over as needed. You'll notice there was a big arrow right there. You notice here at the end, there's a big arrow here as well. So that again is the second followed by the fraction button allows me to type that in. Now if I were to press enter, that would convert my mixed number into an improper fraction. A lot of times we don't want the improper fraction. There are, again, a few cases, slope, sometimes dealing with geometry, but for the most part, you don't want to leave an answer like this. So, there is a button for that. Again, I'm going to press second, and it pops up. Now you see this X10N white button. We're going to use this button, but it's not going to give us access to the X10N. What it's going to give us is going to access again to the green symbols above it. You'll notice as I get a little closer, there's arrows between the ND and the UND. What that means, and what really any arrow on this calculator means, is that it's going to convert it. So if I press second on that button, oops, I did not press second first, sorry. Okay. Second. And table. Okay, you'll see this pops up. And when I press it, it will convert it back to my mixed number form. You press it again, and it will convert it back. So that will allow you to turn mixed numbers and improper fractions into each other. And obviously, that's a much easier process than having to write all this stuff out. The next button that deals with conversion, if I were to press, I had to press second again. Unfortunately, you got to press second every time. It's kind of a pain in the butt, but you do need to do it. Otherwise, it has a chance to really screw up your problem. So I press second, and you see the word table here, and right above that, you see an F, 2 arrows, and a D. So again, those 2 arrows should have given you the heads up that this was some sort of conversion. You might not know what that conversion is. However, you'll notice that there are F and D's there. They stand for fraction and decimal. So this will convert any fraction to a decimal and vice versa. So if I press the second button and then press table, oops, I did not do that correctly. All right, sorry, I got to bring that up again. So if I press second and you see it popped up and then table, it will convert this into a decimal. So 3 over 2 or 3 halves is equal to 1.5 as a decimal. You can also change it back if you need to. Oops, keep deleting stuff by accident. You can also convert it back if needed to. So that's a pretty nifty button, especially if you have a hard time with fractions or you know that you're going to really need to do something on the fly. That can be very helpful. There is another conversion button here. If you look right here above the right parenthesis, you will see an arrow pointing to a percentage. So what that will do is that will convert any fraction or decimal into a percentage. So you'll note the 1.5 became 150. If I were to put 3 over 2 here and do the same thing, it will change it to 150. So that's how you can kind of tell also that fractions are equivalent. The 1.5, the 150%, and the 3 over 2 are all equivalent values, again, just using different methods of showing that value. So I'm going to clear this out here. This button here, above the x squared, it looks almost like a division symbol. That is what is called a square root. So that is the opposite of squaring something. So, for example, if I were to press 5 and square it, I would get an answer of 25. But let's say I didn't want 25. Let's say I want to switch it back. Again, I'm going to press second. You see it pops up there. I am going to press the X2 button. Now, instead of giving me an actual solved answer, it gives me something like this to plug stuff in. So let's say, for example, we wanted the square root of 25. And again, remember, the square root is whatever number multiply itself to get to the big number here. So in this case, the answer happens to be 5. 5 times 5 is 25. So again, this calculator did the work for me. It did all of the square rooting and all of the reducing or finding the square root right here. Now, I mentioned before the term irrational number, and that again is a number that you cannot turn into a nice clean whole number or fraction. There will be some cases where when you try to find the reduced or the square root of a number, you get something that looks like that. So obviously this is a little bit different than this here. However, this does not tell us a complete story. That little square root bar is still there. That tells us that that is as far down as that square root can go. So 4 times the square root of 2 is equal to 32. Now, there is a way to find out what the actual numerical value of this is. And to get to that, I'm going to go back down here above my enter button. You will see this here with 2 arrows right there. This is called the toggle button. So when I press this, it gives me the actual square root of 32, not the 4 times the 2 squared. This is 5.6568544249. So you can see it's a little bit different than when we saw before, where there was a pattern, the 189, or 189, 189, 189. This number does not have that pattern. This number does not repeat. It also does not suggest it's going to stop anytime soon. So this is what's known as an irrational number, because you cannot turn it into a nice clean whole number or fraction. So again, just to further prove my points, I'll press second in table. And in a normal value, this would convert to a fraction for me because it's decimal. But when I press enter, it didn't do anything. So irrational numbers cannot change. That is as low as that can go without overloading the calculator. And that's really it for the buttons. You notice I didn't really go over a whole lot. I went over probably a dozen or so. And out of all these buttons of the calculator, again, we used a very small percentage. So hopefully this was a little more helpful from you. Again, if you're having issues with this, I would recommend going out and buying one. But, you know, that obviously isn't the case for everybody. But if you need to find one, again, it might be worth buying and trying, especially given that we can't get into the building to access our own calculators. But hopefully, again, this does quell some of your fears over using this calculator. It's not a hard calculator to use. Once you know what buttons do what, once you realize what you need and what you don't need, it becomes much easier. So, for example, this test, the task test does not have sine, cosine, and tangent on it, those trigonometry buttons. It does have things like Pythagorean's theorem and coordinate planes and whatnot, but it doesn't have those 3. So that's why I brushed right over them, didn't even bother using them. And actually, a lot of these buttons, again, are going to have that same thing where you're not really going to use them. So, I'll try to put some more practice for this up. Again, if you get your own, feel free to practice that. Otherwise, thank you for joining me. Again, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to get a hold of me. And I look forward to seeing you for my next lesson. So, goodbye.